Okay, we're back.
If I throw out a quick note about them real quick?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Just in general? I think there's a big misnomer about the bowl games progressively get better and more important as the bowl season goes along, from like now till, January 7th or whatever. But for people, if they really want to watch good bowl games, a lot of the really good sort of, second, third ranked teams in their respective conferences play early. Like, for example, tonight, the 14th and 16th ranked teams in the country, BYU, Oregon State, play tonight. And yet, the day before the national championship, there's the GMAC Bowl, which features Central Michigan versus Troy. So, a lot of the really good sort of under-the-radar bowl games are going to be happening before the new year.
Okay, so in other words, so these big bowl games that everybody's making a whole thing about, they're sometimes obviously they're not as entertaining really either, right?
Well, those are good, but like for example, like you've got all the good New Year's Day bowls. Those are all big ones. The Rose Bowl, Capital One Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. Those are all BCS bowl games, or really other really good ones like the Gator Bowl. But then like for the little bit of time, the way they schedule it from like New Year's Day, so like the second, to the 7th, you've only got really 2 more big games.
Exactly.
That's like the Orange Bowl, the BCS Bowl, and then the National Championship.
Exactly.
And in between there, you've got the Alamo Bowl, the Liberty Bowl, the Papa John's Bowl, the International Bowl, and none of those games are as good as the games that are coming on this week, like the Las Vegas Bowl tonight, the Holiday Bowl, the Chick-fil-A Bowl, the Outback Bowl, the Capital One Bowl. All those games are really good, but not as like a lot of people think. All I'm getting at is a lot of people think that the run-up, that every day it's a more important bowl game, or better teams are playing as the time goes on, which is not true.
Exactly, and I couldn't agree more there. Now what we do have, obviously, today is because you're pretty knowledgeable from what I've seen about football. It'd be safe to say that you're a little bit obsessed too with college football.
I love football.
Yeah, definitely. And so what I've got here basically is some of the obviously more well-known bowl games, just to kind of to see your predictions and then of course we'll probably have you back on after they're over in January to see how good you did.
Okay.
So the first one, I know you're really excited about this one, by the way, from your statuses. Oregon versus Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. What are we looking at there?
Okay, so forever, the Big Ten, where Ohio State's from, has never done well in bowls. And the past 5 or 6 years, it's really been a conference that does not do well in bowls. I think the most impressive bowl win happened the year in between Florida's national championship game, so about 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago. Florida played Michigan in, I think, the Capital One Bowl on New Year's Day, and Michigan beat Florida, but it was a good game.
Yeah.
That was the last time the Big Ten really had a good showing, because last year Penn State got throttled by USC. Ohio State always gets smashed. Throughout the season when they play other conferences, USC, who finished on a really down year this year, still beat Ohio State.
Yeah.
So you're seeing sort of a turnaround in the media if you listen to a lot of a lot of sports talk radio. People are turning around and going, maybe Ohio State wins this year, and I'm really still thinking, as much as I hate to admit it because I hate Oregon, Oregon is too much to handle. Ohio State plays really good defense, but I think you're going to see the speed and athleticism of Oregon just really take it to them. This is a team that has Oregon's Chip Kelly. It's their first year at the helm. I think he really wants to capitalize and finish the year on a high note because of the abysmal start they had in their first game. Wants to sort of just, this is a way for him to really sort of seal the year and go, you know what, that Boise State thing was a big mistake. You're going to forget all about it as soon as you see us come out and wipe the floor with this Big Ten team in the Rose Bowl.
Okay, and what's the score prediction you got for Oregon and Ohio State then?
I don't usually do a lot of scores, so this is going to be fun to try to do this. I think you're going to see sort of like a 37-35 for Oregon, and probably I want to say like 17 or 21. So I'm saying I'm going to say 35 to 17. Okay,
so that's pretty much how I would have it. I mean, obviously, I don't know nearly as much about it as you do, but I definitely it's not even a question for me. Oregon to me is the better team, and Ohio. I mean, the reason why Ohio State is their H year is because they're in a lackluster conference. Let's be honest. I mean, that's kind of how the season does seem to go. Is you have teams from the Big Ten or from the anywhere, to be honest with you, anywhere outside of the Pac-10 who are, they're kind of in lackluster, that you have these standouts because they're in a lot, more mediocre conferences, obviously.
Yeah. Look for Ohio State, though, to play. They play sound defense, but they've got to be able to outscore Oregon.
Yeah.
And they've got an athletic quarterback in Terrell Pryor, but I think he's underachieved so far, all the hype he's got. And they play a conservative offense, and they haven't had to dip into the well to sort of go, you know what, we need a lot of points now very often during the season, so they're going to find themselves in a situation they've never been in when they realize that they're down 21 points before before halftime against Oregon.
All right, so moving on into the Orange Bowl, we got Georgia Tech versus Iowa. Now, I'm not very knowledgeable about either one of these two teams, but so what's your prediction for that game?
Georgia, this day and age, it's all about the spread offense, and Georgia Tech is such a refreshing team to watch because they play old school triple option. You don't see 4 receivers, 5 receivers out there, and like a whole lot of motion across the whole football field. You see 2 tight ends and 1 split end maybe, and they do a lot of action behind the center, and they run it a little bit more athletically than the teams that run all the time. If you watch the Army-Navy game, it's a similar offense.
Okay.
Still a little bit more between the tackle instead of going outside. And they're a little bit more athletic than those teams. Nobody's more disciplined than Navy and Army when they play football. But they've got more athletes because they can get more athletes at a non-military school.
Exactly.
Iowa benefited from, again, being in the Big Ten, and they had a quarterback that was a fourth-quarter hero who is not playing in the bowl game. And they lost a couple of big games on the stretch when they really, they beat Arizona and they beat another good non-conference team, sort of surprisingly. But I think Georgia Tech just comes out and brings it to them. Iowa's going to play a good brand of football. I think it'll be closer than people think. So I'm just saying Georgia Tech takes the game, probably 28 to 17.
Okay, that sounds about right. I don't, like I said, I don't know much about those two teams, so I'm not going to make a total knowledgeable prediction. But I would have definitely taken Georgia Tech. I'm not really a big fan of the Midwestern teams like Iowa and Ohio State. So now, okay, then you got the Fiesta Bowl, which is going to have a Texas Christian against Boise State. Now, obviously, I remember watching the Boise State game where that huge game where I believe they played in I'm trying to think, Orange Bowl maybe? I'm probably wrong about that. But it was a really exciting game a couple of years ago. And so I'm taking...
Oklahoma?
What was that?
When they beat Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl?
That's right, Sugar Bowl, thank you.
Yeah.
And and that was an excellent game. So obviously I'm going to go with Boise State. But so what are your predictions for the Fiesta Bowl this year?
Boise State is always gimmicky, and they had that good win against Oregon, but Oregon just wasn't themselves. It was their first game, and they just sort of didn't show up. And they've gone undefeated. Now, Texas, I think Texas is going to play angry because their in-state rival, University of Texas, if University of Texas loses in Nebraska in the Big 12 championship a few weeks ago, TCU has the best, because they're a non-BCS conference, they have the best buy-in to a national championship, probably. Out of all the other undefeated teams. And so they barely missed out because their in-state rival won in playing Alabama for the national championship. So I think they come out, they play angry. They have the most fun defense to watch in the country. A lot of people like watching touchdowns and big plays and stuff like that. But if you want to watch a team that shuts the team down for fun and just does it like they play crazy animals behind the ball, TCU is so fun to watch. I think they actually come out and hit Boise State in the mouth early, and Boise State doesn't know how to react to it because, again, they're another team like Ohio State. They've never been in the position of going, our backs against the wall, we don't know what to do. So I'm seeing TCU, and they can put some points on the board. They beat Utah, and they beat BYU, both of which are really good teams. Last year, that Utah team beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and they straight up punched Alabama in the mouth. So I think TCU probably wins this game
27-13 for TCU. Okay, so you're definitely taking Texas Christian. And they actually this is their first time in a bowl game since, I think they were saying, how many years? The other day
probably since LaDainian Thomas had played for him.
Well, that would have been a little while ago, definitely. So now in the Sugar Bowl, we got kind of an interesting matchup, really, when you think about it, because Florida was last year's national champion, right? And they're playing Cincinnati in the Sugar Bowl. Now Florida's 12-1. Cincinnati are they 12-1 as well?